If you've been grading your footage in DaVinci Resolve by just eyeballing it and hoping for the best, I've got some bad news for you. Your eyes can lie to you, and so can your monitor. That's why professional colorists rely on Vectorscopes, because they give you a reliable source of truth. In this video, you'll learn how all 5 scopes work, the pitfalls you need to avoid, and a workflow hack for Fusion that you need to know. If you're new here, hello, I'm Thom. I'm the lead video editor for Visual+Aid Productions here in Portland, Oregon. I've been a full-time editor for over 20 years, and I'm a certified DaVinci Resolve master trainer. Now, let's dive in. First, let me explain why using scopes matters so much. You see, your internal visual system is actually designed to trick you. Your brain automatically adjusts to different lighting conditions and neutralizes color casts so that you can see the world consistently. But that can be an absolute nightmare for color grading. If you stare at a shot for too long, your eyes will adapt to a subtle blue tint in the shadows or a bit of warmth in the highlights and start seeing it all as neutral. You literally cannot trust your perception of color and brightness values without some kind of objective reference. That's why it's so important that you calibrate your monitor and you use Vectorscopes. These tools don't lie and they don't adapt to their surroundings like your eyes do. Think of them like a thermometer. If you were roasting a chicken, you wouldn't just touch it with your finger and guess the temperature to see if it was ready for you to eat. Your scopes are thermometers for color and brightness. And there's another critical reason for using them. Broadcasters and streaming services have got really strict technical specifications. If your video has brightness levels that are too high or too low, or if your colors are too saturated, your file is considered illegal and can get rejected. Now, scopes are your defense against this because they'll give you clear visual indicators when any part of your signal is out of bounds. So now you know the why, let's get into the how. Scopes live in a dedicated panel in the bottom right corner of the color page. If you don't see it, look for the small icon that looks like a graph in the right-hand toolbar and click it. Now, here's your first pro tip. Undock this panel and turn it into a floating window by clicking the expand icon in the top right corner. This pops the scopes out into a separate window that you can resize, move around, or, and this is what I highly recommend, put on a second monitor if you've got one. This gives you a large, persistent view of your scopes without sacrificing screen space for the viewer and color wheels. The keyboard shortcut for this is Command-Shift-W on Mac or Control-Shift-W on Windows. When your scopes are docked in the main interface, you can only view one scope at a time. You select which one from this drop-down menu, but when you undock the panel, you unlock powerful layout options. Here at the top, you'll see icons for 1, 2, 4, or even 9 scope layouts. Each section can display a different scope. You might have the Waveform and Parade side by side for exposure and color balance, or 4 scopes for when you're doing a final quality control check. In the 3-dot menu at the top right corner, you'll find a couple of global settings. Ratio changes the display format of the scopes themselves between 4:3 and 16:9. This is just for how the scope panel looks. It doesn't affect your actual project resolution. Quality adjusts how much processing power is used to render the scopes. High quality gives you the most detail, but might slow down playback on older machines. Low quality keeps things smooth, but less detailed. I usually keep mine on auto, which balances performance and accuracy. Now let me show you one of the most powerful features that many people don't know exists: display qualifier focus. This creates a direct link between a specific pixel in the image and its location on the scopes. To activate it, first turn it on from the 3-dot menu. Then select the qualifier tool from the drop-down menu in the bottom left of your main viewer. It's the one that looks like an eyedropper. Now, when you hover over any part of your image, circles will appear on the scopes, showing you exactly where the pixel's data lives, except on the histogram, where they show up as lines. It's the fastest way to check exact values of skin tones, neutral grays, or any critical part of your shot. We'll come back to the rest of the settings here in a bit. Before we dive into the individual scopes, a little bit of housekeeping. You'll see me using a DCTL called Prime Grade by PixelTools. It's got all the tools you need for making primary corrections in one place, plus a few overlays that can be really helpful. There'll be a link to that in the description if you want some more information, along with the discount code. Also, I'm using DaVinci Resolve Color Management in this project. Now, if you're a Mac user like me, with the latest version 20.2.2, they finally made some changes that stop you getting that annoying issue of your exported files not matching what you see in your viewer. There was a workaround for it, but it meant you had to color manage with nodes. You can take a screenshot of these project settings and general settings to see how I've got it set up. And I'll leave a link in the description to a couple of videos by Creative Video Tips and Danny Gann that do a deep dive into how all of this works. All right, we're going to start with the waveform. Now, this is your primary tool for analyzing brightness. The helpful part is that it preserves spatial information. And by that, I mean it doesn't just show you how bright an image is, but it shows you where that brightness exists in your frame. Let's break down how to read it. The vertical axis represents brightness intensity. The bottom is pure black, the top is pure white. In Resolve's default 10-bit scale, Black is 0 and white is 1023, which I know seems a little bit weird. Very basically, 10-bit scale is counted as 2 to the power of 10. So you multiply 2 by 2 by 2 10 times, and then you get 1024 possible values. Since digital counting starts at 0, the lowest value is 0 and the highest is 1023. And that is the full extent of my maths knowledge, so please let me know in the comments if I just said something really stupid. In the settings, you can change it to other types of scale like 12-bit, percentages, or millivolts if you have any reason to. You can also pick if you want to view data levels or video levels. The horizontal axis directly mirrors your video frame. A pixel on the far left of your image appears on the far left of the waveform, and a pixel on the far right appears on the far right. The glowing plot is called the trace. The brightness and density of the trace show you the concentration of pixels at that specific position and brightness level. Once you understand this layout, it's pretty simple to read. Bright parts will be near the top of the scope, dark stuff will be near the bottom. An image that's flat or low contrast will show a compressed trace in the middle section. The waveform is super helpful for matching exposure between different shots. In this example, I have a still in my gallery that I want to match the exposure of this shot to. If I double click it to load the split screen view, the waveforms for the visible parts of both clips display side by side on the scope. So you can objectively match black levels, white levels, and overall contrast by adjusting the shot until its waveform visually matches the still. No guessing required. Now let me show you some specific controls that enhance the waveform's power. There are different display modes. The Y mode shows composite luminance, and this is perfect for general exposure work. Switch to RGB mode with colorize enabled, and you will overlay individual red, green, and blue channel waveforms. In this mode, a perfectly neutral color, so white, gray, or black, shows as a single white line where the 3 color traces converge. This is useful for checking white balance on specific objects in your frame. You can enable or disable the 3 separate channels by hitting these buttons. There's a third option called CBCR mode. It's a way to analyze just the color information in the image, completely independent of its brightness. In the YCBCR color space, an image is split into 3 components. Y, which is the luma, or the brightness information. CB is chroma blue, which represents the difference between the blue component and the luma. CR stands for chroma red, which represents the difference between the red component and the luma. So this graph shows you the last 2 components, CB and CR, overlaid on the same graph. The vertical axis represents the amount of color difference. The center line is a 0 point, meaning no color information, so it's neutral, black, white, or gray. Traces moving up from the center indicate a shift towards blue for CB or red for CR. Traces moving down from the center indicate a shift towards yellow, the opposite of blue, or cyan green, the opposite of red. I won't lie, I have never in my life used this option, but I'm also not a broadcast technician. I did say I would cover everything, so now you know it's there. When you're in Y mode, colorize toggles the colors of the waveform trace with the actual hues from your image, giving you a quick visual reference for which colors exist at the different brightness levels. Extents reveals very weak signal information that might not be visible in the main trace. It draws an outline around those parts of the signal to help you see if anything's being clipped just slightly beyond legal broadcast limits. The sliders for waveform and graticule let you turn up and down the visibility of the trace and the lines of the graph. Show reference levels enables adjustable low and high reference guides. So if you've got a specific level that you want to measure part of your trace against, you can set it here and see if your trace is hitting it. In the main settings for all your scopes, the low pass filter applies smoothing to the trace, filtering out noise to make the graph clearer and easier to read. Now, while this can help you see detail in the trace, it can make the highest and lowest parts seem a little bit shy of where they actually are. So if you do use this, you might want to turn on the extents option as well. That way, you'll see the true level of all the highest and lowest parts of the video signal. Now let's talk about the parade scope. The parade is essentially a variant of the waveform, but instead of showing one combined signal or overlaying the color channels, it separates the red, green, and blue channels into 3 distinct side-by-side waveform displays. Now this separation lets you analyze relative intensity of each primary color across that entire tonal range. Each of these 3 graphs within the parade, red, green, and blue, is read exactly like a standard waveform. The vertical axis is brightness, and the horizontal axis is frame position. The power comes from comparing them. A color cast shows up as a misalignment in the height of the 3 parades in areas that should be neutral. So for example, if your image has got a part that's supposed to be white, that area should be at the same height across all 3 channels. If the blue parade is significantly higher than the red and the green, then you've got a blue color cast. It's that simple. Now here's a critical point that trips up beginners. The goal is not to make all 3 parades look identical. An image of a green forest is going to have a strong green channel. An ocean is going to have a dominant blue channel. That's correct. The goal is to align neutral parts, not eliminate the inherent color of the scene. Let's look at the parade's specific controls. The default RGB mode is standard for color balancing, but there's also a YRGB mode that adds a fourth parade for composite luminance to the left of the RGB parades. So you've essentially got the waveform and the parade in one scope. There's also a YCBCR mode. That's essentially the CBCR mode we saw on the waveform scope with the brightness information next to it. Again, if you're not a broadcast engineer or working in QC, you probably won't reach for this one very often. Just like the waveform, you've got options for colorize and extent and reference levels, and these work the same way as they did on that scope. Just before I move on, if you're finding this video helpful, please consider hitting the like button to help other people find it. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more Resolve tips and tricks in the future. It would mean the absolute world to me. All right, back to the scopes. Now we move on to the Vectorscope, which has a completely different design because it's measuring something different, chrominance or color information. It presents color on a circular graph and it measures hue and saturation. Unlike the waveform and the parade, the Vectorscope pretty much ignores brightness or where things are in the image. It answers two questions: what colors are present and how intense are they? The perimeter represents the full spectrum of hues. You'll see targets marked for the 6 primary and secondary colors: red, magenta, blue, cyan, green, and yellow. These targets correspond directly to the direction you'd push your color wheels to introduce those colors. The precise center represents zero saturation, a complete absence of color. So if I turn the saturation all the way down, it plots as a single dot right at the center point. The cloud-like trace is your image data. The direction the trace extends from the center indicates the dominant hues. A trace extending towards the B target means strong blue content. The distance from the center indicates saturation level. A desaturated, muted image has a small trace clustered near the center. A vibrant, highly saturated image has a large trace expanding towards the perimeter. The Vectorscope is helpful for two critical tasks. Firstly, ensuring broadcast safe saturation. For broadcast delivery, there are limits to how saturated something can be. The Vectorscope displays target boxes represents the maximum legal saturation levels. If your trace extends beyond these boxes, the colors are considered illegal and your file will get rejected. You must use the saturation controls to pull the trace back within these legal limits to pass quality control. With that said, we're going to come back to these targets in a minute. The second common use case is for checking that skin is the correct hue. Now, back in the early days of color television broadcasting, so like the 1950s and 60s, color consistency was a massive challenge. The NTSC color system was notoriously prone to color shifts. The joke among engineers was that NTSC stood for never the same color. Engineers and broadcasters needed a reliable, universal reference point to calibrate their cameras to and ensure that when a program was broadcast, the colors that were seen by viewers were the same as those that they saw in the studio. Now, of all of the colors, human skin tones were the most critical. The human brain is incredibly sensitive to incorrect skin tones. If the skin tones are wrong, the entire image looked unnatural and viewers would immediately notice. When engineers and color scientists studied the properties of human skin, they realized that regardless of race or ethnicity, the underlying blood flow in the skin gives it a pretty consistent hue. If you plot the color of human skin on a Vectorscope when your white balance is correct, it consistently falls along a specific axis, roughly at the 11 o'clock position between the red and yellow targets. Now, to make it easier for camera operators and video engineers to quickly check their color accuracy, they started physically marking this line on the graticule of the Vectorscope. This became known as the skin tone indicator. You can enable it in Resolve in the settings for the scope right here. So back then, an engineer would point a camera at a person's face, look at the Vectorscope, and then adjust the color settings until the signal from that person's skin fell somewhere on that line. This provided a quick, reliable, and consistent way to achieve natural-looking skin tones, and that in turn made the rest of the colors in the scene sort of fall into place. Now, even though modern digital color is far more stable than analog NTSC, the skin tone line is seen as so useful that it remains part of Vectorscopes today. Now, with that being said, landing skin tones exactly on that skin tone indicator line isn't really the goal. Think of it less of a bullseye and more like a trusted guideline. It represents a statistical average of human skin color based on the blood flow beneath the skin. Now, it's a fantastic reference, but it's pretty rare that skin will perfectly match this mathematical ideal all the time. Human skin has got a wide range of tones. Ethnicity, suntans, somebody blushing will shift the hue of that skin slightly. And it's going to cause the trace on the Vectorscope to land somewhere near that line, but not perfectly on it. The color of the light illuminating a subject has also got a massive impact. Golden hour sunlight will naturally pull skin tones warmer. A good colorist's job isn't to fight these natural lighting cues, but to make them look intentional and pleasing. If your skin tones are falling in that general vicinity of the line, you're in a pretty good place. Now, if they're supposed to look normal, but they're way off on the other side of the Vectorscope, it's a pretty clear sign you've got a color balance problem that needs to be fixed. Right, now let's have a look at the advanced controls. At the top, you've got options to show the whole image, or just shadows, low, midtones, mid, or highlights, high. This is powerful for identifying if a color cast exists only in the shadows or highlights, or for checking saturation of colors within different brightness zones independently. You have colorize and extents like the other scopes, but there's also a combine checkbox, which lets you see simultaneous overlapping extents for the highlights, midtones, and shadows overlaid on one another. Low range and high range sliders let you manually define the boundaries separating the shadows from the midtones and the highlights. Show 2x zoom magnifies the central area of the Vectorscope. It's really useful for precise adjustments to low saturation images where the trace is small and clustered near the center. If we go to the overall settings for the scopes, you've got some options for how the scale is represented. I usually just leave it in the standard mode, but more importantly, you've got an option for setting your targets as 75% or 100%. The choice between 75% and 100% targets on a Vectorscope is all about matching the color saturation levels to the standards of your final delivery platform. You should use 75% targets when your video is intended for traditional broadcast television that adheres to standards like Rec. 709. The 75% saturation level is a holdover from the analog NTSC broadcast era. Analog systems couldn't handle fully saturated colors without causing signal interference and distortion. To prevent this, color bar test signals were designed with a maximum saturation of 75%. You'll see if we look at the color bars in the scope, they land exactly in those target zones. This became the legal limit for broadcast color. Adhering to the 75% target ensures your colors are broadcast safe and won't be rejected or automatically clamped by the broadcaster. You can use 100% targets when your video is intended for the web, streaming services, or digital cinema. Digital platforms don't have the same signal limitations as old analog broadcast systems. Working to 100% targets allows you to use a full color gamut available in the digital space. Now, with that said, always check the delivery specifications for the platform that you're mastering for. The histogram is the most straightforward of all the scopes. It provides a simple statistical overview of your image's tonal distribution. Now, unlike the waveform, the histogram doesn't tell you where the tones are located in the frame. Instead, it aggregates all the pixels and charts how many exist at each brightness level, from the darker shadows to the brightest highlights. You use it for a quick, at-the-glance assessment of the overall exposure and contrast characteristics of your shot. The horizontal axis represents the full tonal range. Far left is pure black, far right is pure white, and the middle is midtones. The vertical axis represents the quantity of pixels. A tall peak indicates many pixels share that particular brightness level. Data bunched on the left indicates a predominantly dark, low-key image. If it's unintentional, that would suggest it's underexposed. Data concentrated on the right indicates a bright, high-key image. If you didn't mean to do that, it suggests overexposure. A bell-shaped curve in the middle suggests balanced exposure with lots of midtone detail. Tall peaks on both far ends with a valley in the middle represents high contrast with many very dark and very bright pixels, but not very many midtones. A sharp vertical line pressed against the far right edge clearly indicates clipped highlights. A similar line against the far left indicates crushed blacks. With this being a relatively simple scope, there aren't too many options you can change. You can view either RGB or YRGB histograms. The gain slider scales the scope's graph taller or shorter if you want to change the level of detail. Now we get to the most specialized and technical one, the CIE Chromaticity scope. Before we dive into the scope, you need to understand what a color gamut is. A gamut is the specific range of colors that a display technology can reproduce. Different video standards have got different gamuts. The standard for high-definition television is Rec. 709. HDR content often uses the much larger Rec. 2020 gamut. The CIE scope verifies that the colors within your video image are compliant with the color gamut of your intended delivery format. The scope displays the industry standard CIE 1931XI chromaticity diagram, which is a mouthful. Here's how to interpret it. This large tongue-shaped curve represents the entirety of color perceivable by the average human eye. Points along the curved edge represent pure monochromatic wavelengths of light. This triangle represents the boundaries of the specific color gamut selected in your project settings. So in this example, it's a Rec. 709. All colors that can be accurately reproduced within that standard are contained inside this triangle. Your image pixels plot onto this diagram as a trace. For colors to be legal or in gamut, the entire trace must fall within that triangle's boundaries. If parts of the trace extend beyond the triangle, those colors are out of gamut. If you played that image on something only capable of showing Rec. 709, those out of gamut colors would be clipped. A few more things to note. The small dot near the center indicates the reference white point for the selected color space, D65 for Rec. 709, and that defines the color temperature of pure white. At the top, you can pick the diagram type between the standard CIE 1931 XY diagram and the CIE 1976 UV diagram. And from what I understand, the 1976 version is supposed to be considered more perceptually uniform, but the 1931 diagram is the most common industry reference. While the triangle on screen will show you the gamut you're working in, you can also show a second gamut triangle for comparison. They also have a 2x zoom option if you want a closer look. Alright, now I want to address some common mistakes I often see beginners make. Mistake number 1, trying to make everything perfect. Not every image needs to use the full tonal range from 0 to 1023. A foggy atmospheric scene should have compressed contrast. A night scene should be predominantly dark. The scopes show you what is, not what should be. Mistake number 2, ignoring the image while watching the scopes. Scopes are tools, not the final product. You need to actually look at the image. Use your scopes for objective technical decisions, but then verify the aesthetic result with your eyes. It's a partnership. Mistake number 3, misunderstanding parade alignment. Now, I mentioned this already, but it bears repeating. If you're using this scope to try and help you with white balance, you're aligning the neutral points of the image, not trying to make all of the colors equal. If you're grading a sunset and someone says, your parades don't match, they don't understand how to read this tool. A sunset should have an elevated red channel. That's correct. And the parade is going to reflect that. Only the neutral elements, the grays, the whites, and the blacks are supposed to be aligned. Mistake number 4, over-relying on one scope. Each scope shows a different aspect of your image, so you've got to use the right tool for the right job. Like a Vectorscope for checking saturation, a Waveform for checking contrast, and use multiple scopes to verify your decisions. They give you the confidence to make bold creative choices because you know those choices are built on technically sound foundations. Now, while you won't be doing much color work in Fusion, there are going to be times where having scopes could be really useful. Like if you're trying to composite two things together and you want to make them look like they were actually filmed at the same time. Like if you're doing a screen replacement or a background for a green screen. But even if I've got my scopes floating in a window, as soon as I switch to Fusion, they vanish. However, if you look at this little button at the top of the viewer, you've got access to a few different overlays. And within them, you'll find a histogram, a waveform, and a Vectorscope. You can resize them by dragging around the bottom right corner and repositioning them by moving your mouse to the top so it becomes a crosshair, and then grabbing it and moving it. If you want it to be really big, but you don't want to cover the image you're working on, you could load the media out node in both Fusion viewers and then make the scope huge in one of them while you've got your full image in the other. I really hope this video helped demystify the scopes for you. If it did, please hit that like button to help other people find it, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more Resolve tips and tricks like these. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.